All right, we're back on Sports Bit. Betting Insight today, Paulie and Teddy. Thursday, September 29th. Can't wait for a big game breakdown. Louisville and Clemson, Wisconsin and Michigan, and Oklahoma against TCU. We'll throw in Tennessee and Georgia as well. We'll get to bad beats, bad bets, and bad for the books in a second. We start with NFL Market Report. Teddy, here comes the Cincinnati money.
Yeah, Bengals bet up from -7 to -7.5, and I'm a little bit surprised that the move came on Wednesday with the injury news that came out. Tyler Eifert, not likely to play. He's been downgraded to doubtful for Cincy. Jarvis Landry, who missed practice early in the week, upgraded to probable for Miami. So Cincy missing a key weapon, Dolphins expected to have a key weapon. And plus, Bengals have injuries all over the secondary. I mean, they've got no Dre Kirkpatrick this week, maybe no Pac-Man Jones, Sean Williams, or Darren Smith. You know, I think the move is based more on the fact that neither the public nor the Sharps are excited about backing Miami's inexperienced coaching staff in a short turnaround road environment on a Thursday night game. I think that is the bigger issue behind all the Cincinnati money that came in yesterday.
Looks like the Colts are on their way to 3 as they travel to London to take on Jacksonville. So if you like the Colts, bet them sooner rather than later. And they're betting on the Browns again.
Yeah, well, no, they haven't bet on the Browns yet. It's the first time we saw a little bit of Cleveland money come against Baltimore. Last week it was all Miami money, but they're not betting on Cleveland as much as they're betting against Washington as big chalk. The Redskins opened -10. Now it's down to 7.5, and there's some spots that look like they might go to 7. Washington is another team with cluster injuries in the secondary. D'Angelo Hall, Rashard Breeland, Deshaun Phillips all hurt, and no surprise then, while the Cleveland money's come, we've also seen over money in that ballgame. If you like the over, it's another one that you want to bet sooner, not later.
On Wednesday, they popped that Detroit-Chicago total.
Yeah, and again, injury news, a key piece of the equation. That got bet from 46.5 up to 48 at some shops. I mean, the Lions sure look like a dead nuts over team the first couple of weeks, especially with Ziggy Ansah, their best pass rusher, listed as doubtful, and DeAndre Levy, their best linebacker, listed as questionable.
Here's money against the Texans. Money coming in on the Titans with the Watt injury. No surprise there. And Des Bryant, what's going on? Is he going to play? Is he out 3 weeks? Little ESPN on ESPN crime, but money for the 49ers. Dallas down to 2.
Yeah, I mean, with Houston, it's mostly J.J. Watt. And there's a fair bit of anti-Brock Osweiler sentiment out there. You know, he hasn't been particularly good through his first 3 games as Bill O'Brien starter. And I think, like Washington, the markets aren't excited about Houston in that bigger favorite role. For Dallas, I mean, it's an all San Fran money. I mean, the Cowboys are down to -2 at several leading indicator shops. Des Bryant, he's got a hairline fracture. He's unlikely to play. And remember, I mean, all the talk last year is about Romo being out. Well, in the 7 games that Des Bryant missed, they weren't very good, and that's putting it mildly. I think their ATS results were worse without Bryant than they were when you put the aggregate of all the games without Romo. So an impact injury, potentially, for the Cowboys, but certainly the markets aren't sleeping on that one.
Sunday night, the Steelers bet down to 4.5. Monday night, the Vikings up to 5.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit surprised at the KC money that's come in. I know I talked to a couple of guys around town here in Vegas that really like the Steelers, and they tend to be deep-pocketed guys. That being said, Pittsburgh coming off that dismal showing against the Eagles last week. KC with 1 offensive touchdown over the last 2 weeks. Feels like a Steelers spot. I'm surprised we've seen Kansas City money. And for Minnesota, I mean, look, there's a couple of stats that I got to throw out here. The Giants have the number 1 yards per play differential in the NFL. They've outgained their opponents on a yards per play basis between what they've gained and what they've allowed, more than any other team in the league. That is a key stat that the wise guys love. And the Vikings, they're ranked 32 in the NFL in total offense. So while we have seen Minnesota money, and some of that has to do with the fact that this home field for the Vikings, maybe one of the few home fields in the NFL that's legitimately worth 3 points, maybe 3.5 or 4 points, given what we saw in week 2 against Green Bay. But this line isn't going any higher without some wise guy buyback. I'm confident we're not going to see Minnesota steam up to 6 and 7 before kickoff.
To Major League Baseball, only 4 days left in the regular season. The Mets win and the Cardinals lose. The Mets now up 2.5 games. The Cardinals 34-43 at home with another home loss. Only teams with a worse record at home: Atlanta, Minnesota, Arizona, and Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, betting against St. Louis at home, hey man, it certainly helped my bankroll this season. It helped my bankroll last night when the Cards lost again, and they're now down to a 24% chance to make the playoffs based on the ESPN projections after last night's home loss.
American League wild card: Blue Jays with a 1-game lead over the Orioles, 2 over the Tigers. The Orioles have a 1-game lead over Detroit. Mariners still alive, only a few games back. And they did it again. The Blue Jays with another horrible loss. They blew it in the 9th inning Monday, and last night Osuna blew it in the 9th inning. They could have wrapped it up with that win against the Orioles.
Yeah, I mean, Liriano throws a shutout in the 7th, and it's 2-1 in the 9th. Osuna gives up the 2-run bomb to Hyun-Soo Kim, and twice in the last 3 games now the bullpen has blown the lead and cost them a game. It was Grilly on Monday. And I know those Blue Jays fans out there, they're expecting the sky to be falling. The fact, given Toronto's postseason history over the last 25 years, the fact that they've blown these 2 games this week, not a good sign moving forward. Not a good sign at all.
Horrible. See how they respond coming up tonight. Another big game against the Orioles. Bad for the books. Terrible for the books. The Yankees. Here's another bullpen meltdown. The Red Sox wrap up the division, but then they blow a 3-run lead in the 9th, and the Yankees 40-cent move get there.
Oh, yeah, and of course it's all underdog money, plus 150 to plus 110 for the Bronx Bombers, and it's all Craig Kimbrell. You know, he faces 4 batters. He didn't get any of them out, and then Joe Kelly came in and gave up the grand slam walk-off to Mark Teixeira. How about this tweet from Tim Kirchin? You know, home run number 409 for Teixeira. His first walk-off ever in the regular season. The most home runs all time without a walk-off. And, of course, it might be his last home run ever. Teixeira has never been my idea of what a true clutch player is, but certainly got the job done for the Bronx Bombers last night. And, you know, for Boston, it's not a loss that really matters. You know, the person that loss matters for the most is the bookmakers.
Yep. One bad bet: the Marlins had a great early surge on Monday. Then over the last 24 innings of the series, got outscored 20-3. Jay Bruce with a 2-run shot. Mets win that series. They go to Philadelphia now to finish out the season.
Yeah, and the Marlins took a ton of money, plus 115 to minus 115 in that ballgame. And it's worth noting, Jay Bruce hit that 2-run dinger last night. He's kind of slumped in New York. He's kind of gotten going this last week. And, of course, Familia got his 50th save. He's a reliever we've talked a lot about on the show this season.
Yeah. Are you ready? We're ready. Up next, big game breakdown. Wisconsin and Michigan and Louisville and Clemson coming up on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.
Do your research before you bet. Check out our ratings guide to see which books have the best ratings and sign-up bonuses. Open up several accounts. Shop for lines at SBRodds.com. Always be ahead of the game.
All right, back on SportsBit. Time for big game breakdown. As always, live odds, sportsbookreview.com. Some huge games to go over in college football. Let's start with Wisconsin and Michigan. Michigan at home, 10.5, 44.5 the total. The quarterback change. I like Hornibrook a lot better than Bart Houston. I don't know what Chris saw watching practice for almost 2 months that he thought, let's go with Houston. Now, Hornibrook had a lot of help. He had a clean game, and it certainly helped, Teddy, that Michigan State handed Wisconsin 21 points and the short field for most of the game.
Well, sure. I mean, Wisconsin had 1 touchdown drive longer than 28 yards. Their 2 second-half touchdowns were a 5-yard drive and a fumble return touchdown. So Hornibrook was put in a pretty easy spot against the Spartans because he didn't have to do anything, just manage the game. You know, he's a kid that has decent arm strength, but doesn't have great arm strength. And, of course, he wasn't under much pressure last week because of the game situation. But it's worth noting, and it's definitely worth noting in a game that Wisconsin won 30-6. You know, Corey Clements only had 54 yards and 23 carries, and one of them went for 22 yards. So on his other 22 attempts, he gained just 1.5 yards per carry. That's not what you want to support your young quarterback on the road.
Yep, that is cause for concern because you're going against a athletic and tough defense. Michigan has 17 sacks already and allowing less than 50% on completions. If Wisconsin can't run the ball again Saturday, oh man, trouble.
Well, that's the thing with the Wolverines, is that Michigan has shown us very clearly already. They can score on offense, they can score on defense, they can score on special teams. And the markets tend sometimes to devalue the teams that score defensive touchdowns or special team touchdowns on a regular basis, like the Wolverines have done this season. They say, oh, that's lucky, that can't continue. But when we're talking about a young quarterback on the road with an iffy running game, you would say there are more chances for Michigan defensive scores in this game than, say, perhaps the average game. I'll just leave it like that.
And a fantastic Michigan offense led by Spate, who's got almost 900 yards and 9 touchdowns through the air. Is this a public perception of Michigan? Is this wise guy? Remember, they were like 6-1 before the season started to win the title. It's an avalanche of Michigan money.
Yeah, I mean, the wise guys love this Wolverine team. No question about it. They have been power rated as a top 5 team nationally from day one this season. That hasn't changed in this ball game. But I think there is a little bit of a sharp square divide on this game. When you look at some of the consensus websites, when you look at some of the sports books that cater to public bettors, you're seeing a fair bit of support for Wisconsin out there. The number looks a little bit high, even though Michigan has been so dominant at the Big House through the first month of the campaign.
I love the balance. They have 4 guys with at least 145 yards rushing so far. As Michigan, again, great job scheduling another home game for the Wolverines. Game number 2, liveoddsportsbookreview.com. Here we go. Saturday night, monster matchup, Louisville on the road to take on Clemson. A 5-point move in this game already. Louisville now the favorite, laying 2, 67.5 the total, Teddy. People can't get enough of Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, look at the numbers. From day one this season, okay? Everyone that's made a bet on Louisville has continued to bet Louisville, or it certainly seems that way to the sportsbooks directors that both you and I have talked to. And you look at the numbers. I mean, week 1 against Charlotte, they opened 37, they closed 38.5. Week 2 against Syracuse, a 3-point move. Week 3 against Florida State, a 5-point move towards Louisville, all Louisville money. Against Marshall last week, some of that had to do with the fact the Thundering Herd didn't have their quarterback, but it was a 7-point move towards Louisville. So this game opened Clemson -3 in some spots. Now it's Louisville -2. So we're talking about another 5-point move. The markets are on it, and the books, they've been a little bit, I'm not going to say asleep at the wheel, but I think they've underestimated the market support for Louisville. Obviously they have, being that every single week the line's gone up to support the Cardinals.
We love Lamar Jackson. We got on this bandwagon early, but it's worth bringing up. This is one of the toughest environments in college football, and now you look at Jackson's experience on the road. You see his career starts Marshall, Syracuse, Kentucky, Pittsburgh, Wake, Florida State, and NC State. The only tough one was at Florida State, and they lost by 20, and I'm pleasantly surprised by this Clemson defense this year.
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking Lamar Jackson, okay? Louisville showed us pretty clearly against Florida State that it's not just Lamar Jackson. That defense is pretty darn good too, and that defense had a lot of success against Clemson last year. So you talk about Clemson's defense being good. You talk about the fact that this is as tough an environment as any road team's going to face all season. And you talk about the fact that Lamar Jackson, with those road starts, the only truly nasty defense he faced was at Florida State. And as you mentioned, they lost that game by 20. So we have Clemson's defense really good. We have Louisville's defense really good. And yet, look at this total. Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson are going to get all the hype here, and deservedly so. We're talking about 2 quarterbacks that will be playing on Sundays, but it's also worth noting, Marshall couldn't prepare for Lamar Jackson last week. Who would Doc Holliday possibly have on his roster that can run the Louisville plays in practice? Well, Clemson, they see Deshaun Watson in practice every single day. So much easier to emulate Jackson. So we have 2 defenses that are familiar with the type of quarterback that they're going to see on Saturday. I don't know that points in this game are going to be quite as easy as some people do to come by.
Yeah, this is amazing again. Clemson's in the title game last year, and they're going up and down the field against Alabama, and Watson torched them. And here they are, they come in undefeated, and they're getting points at home. Forget what happened in his personal life and what he did to the Atlanta Falcons. Petrino's a dynamite coach, Teddy. What do you think of the coaching matchup here? Who has the edge?
Well, Let me put it this way. I'm not a guy that goes against Petrino very often. That being said, I mean, there's two schools of thought here. The one school of thought here is that, look, when you look at the preseason games of the year, Clemson was double digits in this game. You know, now they're home underdogs to Louisville. And Louisville's been real good. They haven't gone on the road and beaten a team like Clemson yet. You say there's an enormous amount of value on Clemson in this ballgame. And several sharp bettors I've talked to this week really like the Tigers in this ballgame. They put substantial wagers down on Clemson. That being said, there's another school of thought here that is, here's Louisville, and every week they're taking money, and every week the markets are betting Louisville, and the markets haven't caught up with how good this team is yet. And when you have a team that, you know, you jack up the power rating, and the markets still haven't caught up with where they are, those don't tend to be teams that I have any interest in stepping in front of.
All right, two more games coming up next. Tennessee and Georgia and Oklahoma and TCU. Can the Sooners turn their season around? Plus the play of the day. Coming up on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.
Hey, SportsBit viewers, catch the MLB Odds Couple show for today, Thursday, September 29th. A lot of big dogs have been cashing in baseball recently. The Padres, Cincinnati,
You've been on top of that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we analyze all those games in today's shows, and we give picks on some of those games. Do we take the favorites or do we take the dogs? I could tell you now, but I'm not going to.
No.
You'll have to watch the show to find out, right,
It's
Mike
the
Brenner?
element of surprise. But guess what? This is a ticket cashing machine, so when you're all done with Teddy and Paulie, come on over to our house.
All right, back on SportsBit. We continue with Big Game Breakdown. Paulie and Teddy, at Paulie Howard. On Twitter, at Teddy_covers. On CBS, Saturday. Tennessee at Georgia. Tennessee 3.5, 53 the total. Hey, I'll give Butch Jones some credit. Tennessee was the team that came all the way back to win. They weren't the team that blew it this time around. Maybe that can get some of the emotion and carry over to the Georgia game. And maybe there's some buyer's remorse here as Georgia ran Mark Richt out and Kirby Smart. They were embarrassed last week on the road, Teddy.
Yeah, sure. They were embarrassed plenty of times in the Richt era as well. Now, look, the Vols used up a ton of emotion versus Florida last week. And I always worry about a team coming off a big emotional high and now going on the road and laying points on the road the following week. Now, I'm with you. This is the second time now that we've seen Tennessee battle back from adversity. We saw it in the Virginia Tech game early on, and we saw it last week. And I'm with you, giving credit to Butch Jones for kicking that field goal. Well, a lot of times we bitch at coaches, what are you doing kicking a field goal down 21-0? Well, when they kicked that field goal, it kind of got the team's head into the game after they came out way too high at the beginning. But this is kind of a pretty clear weakness now for Tennessee. That offensive line has not progressed. They're not giving Joshua Dobbs enough time in the pocket. They're not creating room for Jalen Hurd to run the football. He's only averaging 4 yards per carry on his 91 rushing attempts so far this season.
First SEC home game for Kirby Smart. It's good for him that he gets to get away from Hugh Freeze and that spread offense. That's the big issue for Saban and Kirby Smart, stopping a spread that goes fast, and that's been their kryptonite. But they did run the ball well. They had 200 yards rushing against Ole Miss, Teddy, in the loss.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that Hugh Freeze spread offense. Let's see, Kirby Smart couldn't stop it when he was at Alabama, and he sure couldn't stop it at Georgia last week. Didn't really have a clue how to do it in this game. The Tennessee offense is much better for Kirby Smart tactically compared to the Ole Miss offense. That being said, Georgia, Nick Chubb, very questionable for this contest, but Georgia still managed to run for over 200 yards at Ole Miss. They've got good depth at running back. The quarterback, Jacob Eason, has shown that he's, after those first two road games against tough defenses in Missouri and Ole Miss, playing between the hedges, has got to help Eason. He's a guy with an NFL caliber arm.
Total too low? Just about right? What do you think?
Yeah, it's not a game that, certainly from a total standpoint, that stands out to me. From a side standpoint, I could only look at the Bulldogs plus the points, even though Tennessee has shown me enough that I'm not in any rush to step in front of the Vols.
Yeah, one more game. LiveOddsSportsBookReview.com. We love Gary Patterson. Oklahoma travels to take on TCU. Oklahoma on the road, 3.5, 69.5 the total. 2 full weeks to prepare for Oklahoma as they try to reboot their season and blown out at home against Ohio State. And hey, pressure on Bob Stoops now Every time there's expectations on Oklahoma, it seems they have a terrible season.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just Oklahoma; it's also Baker Mayfield, and you wonder if that loss to Ohio State, I'm going to say a turning point for a quarterback who has been discounted and dismissed multiple times in his high school and collegiate career. Let me bring out the quote from Baker Mayfield here. It's a long one, but I'm going to go through it because I think it means a lot to talk about Oklahoma's mentality. Quote, "Anytime you play at home and get absolutely kicked, it sucks. Had a great crowd, love the support they brought out. We just didn't play very well. Personally, I haven't played very well all season. That game just goes to show I haven't been the player I was. I've been trying to work on it and get better and better, but it goes to show in big games like that I haven't played well. I let the team down. Coach Stoops can beat around the bush, but I let the team down by this performance. I have to lead better. I've got to keep people positive. I have to take responsibility for that loss. Came out, had a great game plan. Coach Riley had us ready. Just the fact that I have to go out and perform, it's all on me at this point. I know the work I have to put in." You know, I like Baker Mayfield, and I like his character. This is a character kid. He has responded well to adversity, but he might have a whole lot of work to do in this ballgame if the defense can't get stops, especially the way that Kenny Hill is playing, because this Oklahoma defense has struggled repeatedly against mobile quarterbacks.
Yep, and he's got almost 1,500 yards, 6 touchdowns. He's 166 yards rushing with 6 scores as well. Coaching edge to Gary Patterson? You bet. Since joining the Big 12, he's 4-0 ATS against Stoops, beating the spread by 30.5 points, little over 7.5 per game, Teddy.
Yeah, I mean, Patterson has owned, he's not the only coach that's owned Stoops, but Patterson has certainly owned Stoops. And again, covering the number by more than a touchdown per game on the average in those 4 meetings. Again, I mean, I understand the spot for Oklahoma, and I understand that Oklahoma deserves to be road favorite, but that track record, it's a little bit too much for me to get to the window supporting Oklahoma. I don't think there's a lot of value on the Sooner side, even though in theory they could win this game and win it by a pretty big margin.
Oklahoma players are going to be like, who the hell put this schedule together? Houston, Ohio State, TCU, then they got Texas coming up. Jesus, brutal. All right, play of the day, money time. Let's go to the guy from Michigan with the play of the day.
And I can't remember. I mean, like in terms of bets on Michigan in recent years, I might have had a handful. It's not like I'm backing the Wolverines every week, but I sure am backing game number 162. Michigan this week, minus 10.5 against Wisconsin. We talked about it earlier in our big game breakdown. The Wolverines primed to hand the Badgers their first loss of the season by margin. Lay it with the Wolverines. Michigan, minus 10.5. That's our play of the day.
Yep, LSU, Washington, and Michigan so far this week on SportsBiz. Look to keep it going with football. Tomorrow, weekend preview edition, NFL, baby, and we'll recap what happened Thursday night. We'll see you then on SportsBiz. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.